in lieu of the fact that our president's giving the talk and our vice presidents haven't turned up, as secretary, I'm going to chair the meeting.
Oh,
It's only a small group. I was expecting a lot of people
I
tonight.
think Vicky's coming. She's running late, I think.
Yes, she must be.
we can park in our car park.
Yes.
I'll have to.
As Melanie sent me an email, she said there's a new boom gate. They would have them open up for us.
Yeah.
So
Well, I had it up, but I just had it all guarded.
Yes.
Those steel poles.
Poles there, yeah. So someone hasn't got the message properly. Well, as everyone's already been here a few times, I don't need to rattle on about the Theosophical Society, do I? And I think it's a great pleasure. I'm going to introduce our president, Anthony Buzak, who's going to give us a talk on modern civilizations in ancient times, which I've been looking forward to because it's about a very controversial subject in the theosophical world, and that is, were there civilizations back in the past? Because the TS teachings talk about Lemuria and Atlantis as having been previous cycles, whereas some of our modern scientists in the TS poo-poo the idea and say no such thing. In fact, one of them, Victor Gostin, is going to be a guest speaker here in October. So this will be in opposition to Victor. So with no more ado, I will hand over to Tony. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. We'll just try to stay out of the road here. Now, for those of you who know me and have seen me give talks before, you'll know that this is very high-tech for me, and a first. The most high-tech I've ever been before is the whiteboard over there with the marker on it. And that was pretty high-tech for me because usually it was just reading straight, well, not necessarily reading straight from your notes, but just having my notes in front of me. So tonight, I'm going to, this subject, as you know, modern civilizations in ancient times. It is a controversial subject, as Diane mentioned, for a number of reasons. And you did touch on them, and of course it has to do with different theories of evolution, for example. And we'll just have a brief look at the subject and see what we can do. So this is what I hope to look at. Won't necessarily get through all of that. It's a shame that Vicky isn't here at the moment because there was one that I wanted her to pronounce for me, her being of Greek origin. But we will look at that later on as the talk progresses. As you can see there, that looking at three particular theories of evolution, of course Darwinian, creationist and theosophical. And I see, well, I believe that the first two are linear in fashion in that they have a belief that evolution occurred in a straight line with only a few little minor detours here and there, like Neanderthal man and that kind of thing, which ended up being dead ends, and then civilization grew from there. Creationists also believe in that, but over a lot shorter time span. And then, of course, there's a theosophical view which suggests that there is a different way of looking at evolution, and we'll go into that later. Then there's the examples of possible non-human evolution from science fiction, and I'll just look briefly at a couple of those. And also another one of my favourite subjects, reptilians of ufology. Reptilians of ufology. Also looking at archaeology, very, very quickly about the history and science of archaeology, the types and history of dating procedures, problems with these dating procedures, and some enigmas in archaeology, such as aircraft and hieroglyphics, the Baghdad battery and the Antikythera device. That's why I wanted the other two here. And of course the advanced nation states of Nu or Lemuria, Atlantis and Rama. And then just a wrap up. So the question that I pose, probably not a very good colour, but did humans live as we do now, with similar or better levels of technology, thousands if not millions of years before us? or more precisely, before what archaeologists refer to as our recorded history. So before I start, I'll just go on to an idea that I had about archaeology, and it's really well summed up, I think, in this cartoon. I don't know if you can see it very well, but basically it's an archaeological dig in the future sometime, and what's happened is that they've found here what looks like a work cubicle where you've got workstations, computers and keyboards and the like there. And the archaeologist is saying our best guess is that it was some sort of late 20th century prison. Suggesting perhaps that archaeology may not be 100% accurate. I think it goes to say, whoops, get off there. It goes to say a fair bit about perhaps some of the errors that may occur in archaeological, what's the word for it? Thought, perhaps. Does anyone have any ideas on that?
I always think it's interesting that a lot of archaeology is looking at rubbish tips.
Oh yeah, bananas, that'd be nice to see, banana skins and the like. Apples, you know a lot about apples, do you? That you don't put apples in with other fruit because it'll start them,
Fermenting.
well, the apple fermenting will cause the other ones to flower, so they don't tend to put apples with other fruit because it'll make them go off faster. But I shouldn't have written prelude there, I meant to say prologue. But basically what I was going to show you was a couple of books that play a part in this talk. Civilization 1, which is a little picture up there, and this one here, The Secrets of Atlantis. Now you probably know that I've given a talk on The Secret of Atlantis, and it was based to a large extent on Otto Book's book, and I'll talk about them later. But there are a number of books that play a part in the talk, including two by Robert Chirot, a Frenchman, one, The Masters of the World, and the other, 100,000 Years of Man's Unknown History, and some more controversial ones, such as one over here called Prehistoric Germ Warfare, suggesting that mankind is an alien experiment. Now this one, Civilization 1, if you don't mind, I'll just read it, I guess, more than anything. It's a story written by, what's his name again? Christopher Knight and Alan Butler, who, Christopher Knight has a history of the Hiram Key and a number of other successful books. And in this one, they came across the work of a fellow by the name of Alexander Thom, who found, when he measured the Stonehenge and all these type of Stone Age technologies, found that there was a consistent measurement that kept on coming up. And what he determined was that there was something that he called the megalithic yard. And from there, it was postulated and found, with looking at the Sumerians, who are perhaps one of the oldest recorded histories of mankind, that they in fact also had this measurement system. And when they looked at that even further back than the Sumerians, there was a group who actually used the metric system, something like 4,000 years before the French invented it. So questions remain as to what this all means and where it all leads. The other book, as I mentioned, was The Secret of Atlantis by Otto Muck, German title Alles über Atlantis. Now, it's an extraordinary book, it's mentioned here, giving exhaustive proof of several of the key elements of the Atlantis debate. Now, when it came to looking at the subject, it really did explain the possibility of Atlantis and the fiery end that it suffered in one day and one night with a colossal meteorite hitting the Earth just to the east of the coast of America, and placing two great big holes in the ocean floor and causing a gigantic rift in that part of the ocean, which travelled up through to Atlantis and destroyed Atlantis. And also there were tidal tsunamis and those type of things going on at the time that wiped out everything. And that's what the premise is of that book. I won't look at the other books at this stage, but suffice to say there are a couple of good ones there. The National Geographic also put out some really good articles on Neanderthal man. I'm one of the school, by the way, they call them Neanderthals, not Neanderthals. So it's not a spelling mistake when I go into it. Now, I went onto the internet and looked at a particular site called Anomalies, and it comes from paranormalabout.com, evidence for a new history. Now, going into this, there are several particular things that have happened in time or that have been found that suggest that there are some strange things happening or have happened. Now, in the 1880s, for example, the anthropologists found the remains of a modern-looking man, woman and two children in glacial strata that were dated at 10 million years. Now, far older than the currently accepted model, which suggests that mankind, that modern man, Homo sapiens, are only about 200,000 years old. And in 1971, an amateur archaeologist and geologist found a human tooth in a strata that was supposedly 100 million years old. In 1932, an experienced trapper found human footprints in gypsum rock, white sands, and it measured something like 22 inches, suggesting that there was a time on Earth where giants existed. And carrying on from that, the heading there, giants, two brothers digging into ancient Indian mounds in Minnesota, unearthed the skeletons of men that would have stood over 8 feet tall, and again a similar thing happened in the 1930s. The other is about some prehistoric science and technology. In 1968, a Russian archaeologist found a large-scale metallurgical factory. Now, it dated back somewhere to 4,500 years ago, so that was a little after the Sumerians, but still they had made vases, knives, bracelets, and copper, gold, iron and bronze at a time when they supposedly weren't able to, according to current archaeological thought. Now, in Israel, in 1966, researchers found in a cave, a piece of manufactured glass. Now, this is probably an interesting one to anyone who's studied astronomy. And the glass measured 11 feet long, 7 feet wide, and 1.5 feet thick, and aged about 1,400 years. Now, such a feat of glass making, as it says here, was not matched until the creation of the mirrors, the Mount Palomar telescopes in the 20th century. So we're talking about technology that perhaps shouldn't have existed that long ago, but for some reason there seems to be proof that it was there. Now, the next was the ancient Peruvians. It was found, a report was made by a Jesuit priest in 1690 that he had actually seen Peruvians flying in a hot air balloon. Now, 1690, by the way, is about, I think the Montgolfier brothers supposedly invented hot air ballooning, and they didn't go into the air until about 100 years after that. Maybe a little bit less, about 90 years, I think. Now, this is just some sampling of the wealth of intriguing anomalies from a fellow by the name of Brad Steiger, and in his book, Worlds Before Our Own. Now, of course, they're called anomalies only in relation to current scientific belief. More correctly, they should be regarded as concrete evidence that we know very little about the true history of humankind on Earth. Okay, so to kind of start, evolutionary theories, some differences. Now, this is going to be very brief. Darwinians. Linear. Now, the idea is that, again, when we supposedly crawled out of the swamps and progressed from one life form to the next until we finally became ape and then human. There were many stumbles along the way, but it was still a journey that was straightforward. One of the interesting things I found that has nothing really to do with the argument, but really is to do with the Neanderthal man. As you see on the left there, that is supposedly a reconstructed skull of a child Neanderthal. Now really, when you look at them, there's not much difference from us as human beings. Now, certainly they had larger skulls than us and had brain cases that were larger. Why they died out could never be known. It is suggested that they interbred themselves out with the rest of the human race. They're certainly not the ape-like creature that was presented to us for 100 years perhaps. In the National Geographic, they did an article in 1996 where they found a way of photographically morphing a fellow who closely resembled the Indians of Southern America, and they then wrapped his skin around one of these faces, or one of these skulls of a Neanderthal, and came up with what they believed was a true representative of what a Neanderthal would look like. And there is an example. Now, they don't look very different to us. Certainly the brow is larger. But for some reason, archaeologists claim that they weren't even of the same species as us. And when I look at that, I see someone who perhaps, if they would walk past me in the street, I probably wouldn't have recognised them as being any different than any of the other people in the street that I've walked past. I'll just pass it around if you like. That's just the fellow there, and I've reconstructed him with the Neanderthal's head. It just shows you in a way that archaeologists, in my way of thinking, don't actually get it right all the time, and that it's all conjecture. Now, creationists are another, as you know, people who believe in biblical evolution. And they believe, of course, that the world was created in 1 week. Actually, it was less than a week because God had the last day off. And that the earth and all life on it is only a little over 5,000 years old. And that mankind walked with dinosaurs. Strangely enough, the creationists believe that, or actually favour the argument currently going on about the possibility of life existing before these times, and having actually have modern societies living in ancient times, because it denies the Darwinist theory. But I don't see how it actually fits in with their theory. But they seem to have grabbed it, and if you look on the internet, for example, and have a look, you'll find that nearly every second argument is one from a creationist who then quotes the Bible and says, this is the proof that we need to say that Darwin is wrong. And of course, then there's the theosophical evolution, and this has come from, I think, Hodson, in one of his books. Basically, what we need to know is that theosophical evolution is mostly a spiritual evolution. But more than that, it's an evolution of not only us, but it's also of our planet, of our world, of our solar system, our galaxy, and our universe. And perhaps even further than that, if we go into multiverses. So we're talking about a broader way of looking at evolution than the other two, and that the non-linear side of it that I was talking about was that we don't have that coming out of the slime, growing up into becoming ape and then becoming human. Of course, a lot of scientists will knock this because there is no scientific evidence for the process of spiritual growth. You can't actually see it. And so when they look at something like the evolution as proposed by Theosophy, they would suggest that it's simply a reaction to Darwinism. Oops.
The
Okay.
theosophical interpretation of evolution, just while you're on the subject, I understood it was more just the spiritual emphasis on the whole process, but it still sort of went along with the appearance of the Darwinian type of evolution, but it said that the pressure that caused the evolution was a spiritual one. But you're saying that's not the case?
Well, when we look at the way that Theosophy classifies it, we're supposed to go through most life forms, most kind of life forms, right? Evolution is supposed to be where we experience what it's like to be a mineral, then we experience what it's like to be a plant, then we experience what it's like to be an animal, and then finally to a human. Well, not finally, but then after human, wherever else we go from there. So it is evolution in that sense as well. There is a physical evolution, but there's a spiritual one as well, starting with the monad, for example, and then coming down into the less what am I saying? Less
Evolved sort of.
less spiritual, more material aspects of life. And from the way I see it, the idea of the monad and becoming that, and then coming down into the more material parts of the world, is then mirrored in human formation in a physical sense. So it's a bit like the alchemical idea of as above, so below type of thing, where you have it mirrored that way, and so then the monad is kind of shown again inside a woman, for example, with the germination of the seed, and from there the growth of the child, and that kind of thing all over again.
Also, there's a concept in the secret doctrine that human beings as a physical form don't come from the apes.
No.
That the spirit creates a form, or created forms in the beginning, or at a certain point in the evolution. And therefore there's not this concept that we come out of the ape line. The ape line is actually a throwback from us.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting area to look at.
And of course that is one thing that we're criticised for, because the scientists aren't happy with that aspect. They do really think it's an anti-Darwin approach, which in a way it is, but there are aspects of it that kind of mingle with Darwinistic theory. I think it's kind of a bit more encompassing than the other two approaches.
But as we're finding more about DNA, there's quite a lot of controversy arising about the Darwinian theory anyway at the present time. I've picked up a bit of it on the internet, which is very interesting.
I mean, I suppose the one thing I picked up in all of this was that you've got to be careful what you read on the internet. There's certainly a lot of things there that are just absolutely false. Absolutely. There are other things, of course, that are real gems. But anyway.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say, though, that there is controversy going on.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the next slide. No non-human advanced civilizations on Earth. Now, you'll see here that this is taken from Doctor Who. Now, the idea in that show in the 1970s, this is the one where John Pertwee was the Doctor, and I think these creatures were called the Ceruleans. Oh, that's better. That's what that's for. There you go. And the idea of these creatures were that they were in fact the masters of the Earth, and they saw a catastrophe coming, and they hid under the earth, under the oceans, to protect themselves, and they went into hibernation. And when they came out of that hibernation, those ape creatures had taken over the Earth. Just a little idea about something in science fiction that perhaps has a ringing of truth about it. And it depends, of course, whether you're into an understanding of ufology, for example, but perhaps some of these creatures, if they do exist, perhaps are doing what's is suggested, that they're actually going around and trying to take over the world. Who knows?
There is quite often reports in ufology of a reptilian type of being,
Yes.
but it's not extremely reptilian like that.
No.
It's more humanoid with certain reptilian features.
Yeah.
And it's often seen actually in conjunction with other races, other alien races.
Yeah.
It might just have been that on that particular planet, life didn't go through exactly the same path we went through before it became intelligent.
Yeah. Now this one's from Star Trek Voyager, and the hypothesis was, it was presented on that show that suggested that biped reptiles had evolved and left Earth millions of years ago to avoid the mass extinction that they knew was coming. Now they settled in the Delta Quadrant where the crew of Voyager encountered them. An interesting idea, again suggesting that over, 165 billion years the dinosaurs ruled the Earth, and not once did they actually crawl out of the slime basically and become a master race on Earth. Maybe they did. These are the fellows you were just talking about, or something similar to them, the reptilians of ufology. Now there are many conspiracy theories, as it says there, involving them, suggesting that either they're extraterrestrial or terrestrial, and that the so-called greys that we hear about are actually these guys, and others of course suggest that that's not the case, that these are totally different. But if you notice, their heads are very similar, and they've got similar type of eyes and small slitty mouths that are encountered with the greys in ufology lore. Just go on to some of the enigmas in archaeology. Now, archaeology began around about the 1850s, and I think in a couple of slides from now I mentioned a fellow there, an Italian fellow who decided enough was enough when it came to all the pillaging and destruction of sites, and he thought there'd have to be a need to scientifically appraise a lot of the things that were being dug up. And so archaeology kind of began with him, and from there it became a science where he found ways of measuring things and doing things like working out stratification of objects, of layers of soil and the like, and measuring from there that it was so old because of those different layers, and that's still used today. And so, and also in other ways too, with the ice cores, when they go to Antarctica or the Arctic, they'll drill down very deep ice cores to look at the different layers and ages of the Earth, and they can tell from them what's happened in those periods because they've had gases and that trapped in them. And of course the other way of measuring is the tree rings. Mind you, I think I'd lose count after about 50. I just wonder how they were able to do it all, but nonetheless there are a lot of ways and a lot of different things that they do. So what methods of dating are used to prove their hypotheses? Now there are many different methods of dating, as I've just mentioned, and the most well-known perhaps is carbon-14 dating, which was invented in the 1950s. And one of the problems with carbon dating is that it has a half-life, or carbon-14 has a half-life of about 5,300 years. What happens then is that over that 5,300 years you lose half of the radioactivity of that carbon. What happens with carbon-14? It is in the atmosphere through either radiation coming from outside the Earth's atmosphere. It settles on plants. The plants are eaten by animals. The animals are eaten by people, or the plants are eaten by people, ingested, and are absorbed into the bone and marrow of the animal. That then is the thing that they're actually looking for. It's the carbon-14 trace in that marrow or bone. Now, 5,300 and whatever it is, 47 years or something, that drops by half the radiation level in it. But it's not as if you lose the next half totally in another 5,300 years, it drops again by half, and then again by half, and then again by half. So you don't really ever lose all your carbon-14, but it becomes so minuscule that it can't be read. And it lasts about 50,000 years. So carbon dating can only go back 50,000 years, no further. So how do they come up with millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years and all these type of things? I think it's a good guess. Now, there are other different systems they use, different isotopes they measure, and those type of things, but none of it can actually be proven. Okay, so these are some of the tenets of archaeology, and if I can get it, go there, okay. They showed the importance in the 1860s of the need to stratify excavations, the importance of the small find, rather than looking for those big things out there and taking away the raiding the tombs of the kings, whatever, and coming out with the chariots, but also found that things like pots and pans and things that are a part of everyday life are just as important because they showed an anthropological or a sociological meaning for those things. So definitely you could say that there was an effort to ensure that the kind of things that had been happening before, sorry, I just lost my thought. What time is it? Up there on the other side there, they've got a time on that. Just might keep an eye on it. But it gets to 128 or 128, we're in trouble. Okay? Oh, to 0, we're in trouble. I don't know if you can see it.
I see 55.
Oh, okay. Right. So we've got a while. All right. Apologies. Now, yeah, so as you can see, the Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli, he was the one who actually took the first steps to ensure that archaeology had become something other than just a pillaging thing. And that's in paragraph 3 there, where he kept track of the stratigraphic layers, etc. And showing the importance of those other things. Oops, sorry. There. And yeah, just the limitations of carbon dating. Once again, the size of the archaeological sample is important. If it's too small, it can't be read all that well, and the larger the better, because purification and distillation removes some matter. Second, great care must be taken in collecting and packing samples to avoid contamination by more recent carbon. That brings up the idea of the Second World War and the amount of carbon that was thrown up into the air because of, in particular, the atomic blast, which then puts into doubt future carbon dating on humans who are alive now or other animals that are alive now, because the carbon level in us will be far greater than it was in humans in previous times. So then we have things like I'm not sure what that logarithmic thing is, so I can't tell you about that one. And of course, the ratio of C14 to C12 in the atmosphere is not constant. And that was what I was just mentioning about the C14 being greater now because of the nuclear detonations. Now, although radiocarbon dating is the most common and widely used chronometric technique in archaeology today, it is not infallible. So these are, These are the advanced nation states that are often talked about, Mu or Lemuria. Now, Mu is the Asian name for Lemuria, and it was situated supposedly in the Pacific Ocean, pretty well quite a way across the ocean. It was a rather large continent. From what I could see in some of the drawings of it, it was pretty much as big as mainland Europe and Asia together, from what I can see. And then, of course, we have Atlantis. Now, Rama is the ancient Indian civilization, and Tiwanaku, which is the ancient Peruvian, I think, culture. Now, this is the relics of Mu or Lemuria, supposedly, that were found off Japan. Now, I don't know if you can see them all that well, but they seem to be things like straight lines carved. In the centre one, there seems like a staircase going up, and on the one on the right, again, suggestions of a temple or temple-like object. Now, they claim that because of the level of the ocean and that type of thing, that it should be around about 8,000 to 10,000 years old. But some of the arguments against it are that there doesn't seem to be any entrances or any tools around anywhere lying around to suggest that it was a man-made thing. The suggestions by the anti-relics of Mu was that the formations could be attributed to erosion or coral settlements. I don't know. Personally, they look very, very human to me, but whether they're natural or man-made, I guess the jury's out. The sharp angles and lines in the stone may be the result of the way the stones are eroded, breaking off at right angles. That was one of the suggestions of the scientists. This is one of the things that happened after the tsunami in December of 2004, and as you can see there on the top left-hand side, it's a couple of statue things that believed to be a part of the, Diane, can you pronounce that? Mahabalipuram temple?
Mahabalipuram.
Temple, yeah, in Tamil Nadu. And it was found once the ocean receded with the tsunami, and apparently it hasn't come back to the level of where it was before, and that's why these things are still exposed. And again, they're believed to be fairly old, but nowhere near the age of some of the other things that have been found, like the relics of Mu. And one of the other things that was found on the left-hand side at the bottom of the Buddha there, bronze Buddha, and it was made. It was made of bronze, and it was lined with some other objects. They believe it was 7th century AD, and simply by looking at the other World Heritage Temple at the Mahabalipuram site. Now, this is one of the more controversial parts of the Indian civilization of Brahma, and it was a suggestion that there were flying vehicles as a part of their technology, and that they had weapons of mass destruction and advanced technology. Now, modern man calls it mythology, but according to some, the writers of these ancient epics and documents call it history. And I guess it's just a way of looking at it. If you look at it as history, you may actually get something different out of it than if you look at it as a piece of fiction. And I suppose there's a bias there that needs to be addressed one way or the other, and I guess it's only up to you to decide. There are some things that are suggestive of it. I think I'll bring it up later. Or is it here? Oh yeah, okay. This is an interpretation of the verse of the Mahabharata of 6500 BC. Now, this interpretation was made shortly after, I think, World War II, and this may hold the key to it. And I'll read this. Gurkha, flying a swift and powerful Vimana, hurled a single projectile, charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 1,000 suns, rose in all its splendour, a perpendicular explosion, with its billowing smoke clouds, the clouds of smoke rising after its first explosion, formed into expanding round circles like the opening of giant parasols. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Varishnis and the Andakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognisable. The hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this, the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Now, of course, when we read that, we immediately think that's an atomic explosion or an atomic war. And when you look at it, you say, well, more so, it seems to be, it could only be an atomic explosion. Then keep in mind that it was translated shortly after World War II. I say that because there's another version of it coming up. And this is the controversy. Although no one disputes that the Mahabharata contains descriptions of flight and of very powerful weapons, some believe that modern translations have been biased to make them sound more like modern technology. Now, below is the same passage given above, which sounded like a nuclear explosion, taken from a translation made circa 1896. Now, it also bears mentioning that this passage is not in the Dronapava. Now, I'm not sure what that is anyway, and cannot be found there using the search feature at sacredtext.com, but was instead found in the Masula Pava. I don't know the difference between the two, so I couldn't tell you. When the next day came, Samva actually brought forth an iron bolt through which all the individuals in the race of the Varishnis and the Andakas became consumed into ashes. Indeed, for the destruction of the Varishnis and the Andakas, Samva brought forth through that curse a fierce iron bolt that looked like a gigantic messenger of death. The fact was duly reported to the king. In great distress of mind, the king, of Grozny, caused that iron bolt to be reduced into fine powder. Vishampayana said, while the Varishnis and the Andakas were thus endeavouring to avoid the impending calamity, the embodied form of time, death, every day wandered about their houses. He looked like a man of terrible and fierce aspect, a bald head, he was black and of tawny complexion. Sometimes he was seen by the Varishnis as he peered into their houses. The mighty bowmen among the Varishnis shot hundreds and thousands of shafts at him, but none of these succeeded in piercing him, for he was none else than the destroyer of all creatures. Day by day strong winds blew, and many were the evil omens that arose, awful and foreboding the destruction of the Varishnis and the Andakas. The streets swarmed with rats and mice. Earthen pots showed cracks of broke from no apparent cause. At night the rats and mice ate away the hair and nails of slumbering men. Sarikars chirped, sitting within the houses of the Varishnis. The noise made by those birds ceased not for even a short while by day or by night. The sarashas were heard to imitate the hooting of the owl, and goats imitated the cries. O Bharata of jackals, many birds appeared, impelled by death, that were pale of complexion, but had legs red of hue. So there's a different interpretation or different translation of the same text. Certainly the first few lines of this suggest something similar to a nuclear explosion. If you go back over the actually brought forth an iron bolt through which all the individuals in the race, the Varishnis and the Andakas, became consumed into ashes. That does sound like some kind of atomic destruction. But it's certainly not the same kind of paragraph as we saw above. And
There are a few areas where large areas have been found where the sand has been fused almost to glass.
Yeah, and that was in Syria.
Was it?
And there was an area, something like 150 by 53 kilometres in the deserts of Syria that was glass. And they did have photographs of it. I'm not sure if I actually put any in here. Okay, so right now, what I'll do now is just give you some examples of circumstantial evidence. The first was the ancient flying machines. The second, the Antikythera device. Sorry, I can't pronounce that one properly. Vicky or Steve, maybe you could pronounce it for us next time. I'm talking to the camera so that, in case they watch it. South African metal spheres, the Baghdad battery, the Kozo artefact, human hand and footprint, fossilised human finger, 65 million year old metal tubes, and the Ica stones of Peru. I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but they're the enigmatic carvings from the temple of Abydos in Egypt. They were discovered by Dr. Ruth Hover. She photographed a wall panel which had been revealed when a newer overlaying panel crumbled and fell off. The older panel beneath contained embossed images that resembled modern aircraft as seen in profile. Now at the top left, you'll see what looks suspiciously like a cargo helicopter, or a bit like perhaps Elvis. We've all seen Elvis, the helicopter that scoops up the water. Does look a fair bit like that one if you... This fella here. The other one, to me, looks a bit like a flying saucer UFO, but it's a cigar-shaped object with a large antenna. At the middle right, on the far side, it looks like a fat jet or saucer. And the one at the bottom, to me, looks like a jet from the cartoon Roger Ramjet. That's this little fella here. What are they? Who knows? Are they really aircraft from ancient times? There's no credible answer, and certainly there's no hieroglyphs that explain what they're about. But still, nonetheless, it's one of those things that's been going around the internet for a while now. Whether it's true or not, whether it's been manufactured, made up, who knows? Unless we go over there. Any of you going over to the Temple of Abydos, please take a photograph. Oh, get back there. Right. Now, are these really aircraft, just toys, or ritual symbols? The one on the left is the an Egyptian artefact, and the one on the right is a South American artefact. Now, the Egyptians, sorry, can't see that? It's too low, is it? Actually, just so I happen to have another copy here, in case this thing didn't work. Okay, yeah, there was discussion about that trinket on the right-hand side, and it was about supposedly around about the 500 to 800 AD mark, according to this, and found in Central America, and not one, but quite a few of them apparently, along coastal areas of South America. You might guess that it was a child's model of the space shuttle or a Delta-wing fighter aircraft if you didn't know any different. Now, when it was first discovered, archaeologists called it a zoomorph, that being an animal-shaped object. Now, no one has been able to find any animal that could perhaps look like that anyway, so it's a rather strange thing to suggest, but you can see there that there are indications of mechanical aspects to it, like stabilisers, fins and rudder, and surprisingly what looks like an area over here that could be where a pilot can sit. And actually the Egyptian artefact has been used, actually not used, but reconstructed from photographs of some of the digs, and has been shown that it could fly. And it's just a model, the one they used, of course. They didn't build a full plane. Now, this is the Antikythera device. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this device before, but it's been in a few science magazines recently because they've found ways of photographing it that they've never been able to do before. They've used a new technique that could actually bring up the writing on the outside of, I think, the back of it, which couldn't be seen before because of the amount of erosion and that kind of stuff that had happened to it. And it's a special light technique which was discovered by a filmographer. But what it is, it's a device that they found when a fellow had been doing some deep sea diving off a wreck. And he discovered a wreck in about 1900. And he found a whole heap of things, and this was amongst them. It was just a clump of corroded stuff. And when he brought it up to the surface, someone looked at it and they thought there were cogs and that on there. And later on, as technology improved, they took more photographs of it and took X-rays and the like, and came up with all these gearings and everything that you can see in the middle drawing. And from there, it's on that one too. From there, they constructed what it actually looked like, which was the one on the right there, which was a case that had it in it, and it was basically believed to at least have been a device that could measure the movements of the sun, the moon, and the Earth over a given period of time, and could see quite a few. It could predict the positions of those things and in the zodiac at any given time. Now, new analysis suggests that the device was cleverer than Price thought and reinforces the evidence for his theory of an ancient Greek tradition of complex mechanical technology. So a device that was really seemingly way ahead of its time, and it was suggested that it came about around about the 1st century BC. See that okay? Now this is the South African metal spheres. Now that's actually bigger, well, of course it's bigger there, but it's bigger than what it actually is. They're only about an inch in diameter, these things. And they were found in the last few decades in mines in South Africa. And of course they don't know where they've come from or what their purpose is, but there are two different types. One composed of a solid bluish metal with flecks of white. The other is hollowed out and filled with a spongy white substance. Now, the thing is that they came about they've come from the Precambrian era, which dates back to 2.8 billion years. Now, so who made them and for what purpose is unknown. At 2.8 billion years. Now, humans are only supposed to be about 200,000 years.
It makes you think that what we say is ancient history is really quite recent.
Yeah, exactly.
All this stuff is really ancient history.
Yeah.
And we know nothing about it, really.
Again, some of it we can't prove, but it's just one of those things that, there's some interesting oddities, and archaeology won't accept that they're real anyway. They'll just say they're one of those oddities that they don't know anything about, and they just put it in a box. Just like in X-Files, where the cancer man would go and take the box away and put it in a sealed container somewhere and it'd never be seen again. Same idea. And I think that's probably what happens to a lot of these things. Now this is called the Baghdad battery. It's called that because it was discovered there. Now, most of you probably know that Iraq is the site of the ancient Sumerians, and it's believed that the device that's there comes from around about 248 BC era. But there were ones found that were older than that date back to 2500 BCE, before the Common Era, at a site near the Sumerians. Now, when the vases were lightly tapped, as it says here, a film separated from the surface, which is characteristic of silver, electrolyted onto copper base. It would appear then that the Parthians inherited their batteries from one of the earliest known civilizations, so the Sumerians actually got it from someone else further back in time. This is the thing. This is the thing called the Koso artifact. Now, while mineral hunting in the mountains of California during the winter of 1961, Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey and Mike Sell found a rock, among many others, that they thought was a geode. A good addition for their gem shop. When they cut it open, they found this object. Now, it seemed to be a 1920s type spark plug, but it was inside this rock, a geode, which supposedly, if it was a geode, would be about 500,000 years old. So how could a 1920s type spark plug end up in a 500,000 year casing? So, strangely enough, that object has gone missing and can't be tested anymore. So there's no way of proving one way or the other whether it was truth or fiction, because it's no longer available. That was an X-ray of it in the rock. Now, there have been quite a few objects found in coal before. People have cut open lumps of coal and found metallic objects in them, like a bucket and something with nails and things in it like that, inside the coal. Suggestions were, of course, that the objects were as old as when the coal formed, but there were suggestions by scientists that they could be as little as about 5 or 10 years old, according to their ideas of how coal could form around them. I'm yet to see the proof that coal can form so quickly, but that was one of the suggestions put by the scientists, that this particular coal could form quickly, and people had just thrown these objects down there or something, and they spontaneously grown coal around them. This is one of the fossils. Sorry, it is on that thing again too, it's in the road. I have to know that for next time, won't we? We'll have to put it so that it goes up further. Now this is what looks like a fossilised handprint in a piece of, what was it? It's a piece of rock of some description, I can't remember what it was called, but it seems to have come from that limestone, and it suggested that it was about 110 million years old. Again, if this is the case, it far exceeds the time limit of supposedly of human evolution. And strangely, like I said before, the creationists, for some reason, favour this because it discredits Darwinism, and somehow they think that it actually helps their case. Now this is the unusual one. This is the one that they claim may be a fossilised human finger. And if you look at, there's a human finger at the top, and then there's what looks like an X-ray of it underneath. And there does seem to be like almost a bone-like structure in the middle of it. Now, it was found in old collections of fossils from Axel Heiberg Island in the Canadian Arctic. It appears to be a fossilised finger, like I said, and it seems to have come from the Cretaceous age in Texas by Dr. Carl Bale, and is dated around 100 to 110 million years again. And it's got the lovely name of DM93, DM93083. This is just a drawing of some metal tubes that were supposedly found and are dated to around about 65 million year mark. As we know, humans weren't around then, according to the sciences that exist, and never mind people who could work metal. So then how does science explain semi-ovoid metallic tubes dug out of 65 million old Cretaceous chalk in France? Now in 1885, a block of coal was broken open to find a metal cube, obviously worked by intelligent hands in 1912. and employees at an electric plant broke apart a large chunk of coal out of which fell an iron pot. A nail was found embedded in a sandstone block from the Mesozoic period. So there are a few things that you can see that seem to belong or don't belong there that have been found. Now this is the one that has got the creationists very excited. It's the Ica stones of Peru. Now it's got them excited because what it seems to show there is a prehistoric animal being ridden by a human, and that animal looks like a triceratops. They're the ones that look a bit like a rhino, and it's got the what do you call it? The plates, yeah, all the way down their back. What can you make of it? Well, you know, this is supposedly dated around about the 1500 to 1500 AD time. This is perhaps the thing that really excited the creationists, because they do think that it fits in with their theory that the Earth is only 5,000 years old. Now, the interesting thing was that these came about with there's no suggestion there that they are just skeletons. So, you know, what are they? The other suggestion is maybe it's something like Dinotopia, if any of you have seen that, where there's this lost island of dinosaurs and humans living happily together. You know, or maybe it's just a fake up by a group of creationists. Get back. Okay. Now, of course, these items could just be representative of everyday life in ancient Egypt and South America, for example. But what could they be? Are they simply some form of decorative headdress, perhaps worn by pharaohs or high priests or the trendsetters of the time? Or are they just toys? Or are they really what they appear to be to our 21st century minds? There is no real answer. There can't be, because no physical evidence of these hieroglyphic enigmas, written texts or sculptures still exist, and no user manuals came with the bizarre archaeological objects just viewed. Finally, for a moment, let us ponder what physical remains of our civilization would be found in 100 years. Let's say if, for example, we did have a nuclear strike here or something, and we couldn't come back, we couldn't stay here. What would remain of our society, of our structures, of our buildings? What would remain in 1,000 years? What would remain in 10,000? And what would remain in longer than that? But if you look back at Chernobyl and look at some of the villages that had to be abandoned because of the radioactivity there, and seen some of the documentaries that have been taken there since then, you'll notice that it's very degraded. In just a short period of time that it hasn't been looked after, that there haven't been people mending gardens and you know, mending fences, gardens, whatever. The things have overgrown and things are really looking quite dreadful in just a short period of time, as the Chernobyl incident, which was the early 1980s. So that's only 20 odd years, and things have degraded terribly in that period of time. What would happen 100 years to us? Well, certainly you'd think, well, you'd have the termites in, you'd have rodents and pests in devouring things like the wood and the like. And over 1,000 years, things would start to collapse. You may have some of the things that are around here still remaining, but likelihood is there wouldn't be very much of it all left. And in 10,000 years, there'd be very, very, very little left. And could you imagine what it would be like in 100,000 years from now? Obviously, if anything, there may be a few small remnant of tile or ceramic. There wouldn't be much else left.
What about stainless steel things and all
Yeah,
these?
you'd wonder about that. But then, stainless steel even has a life, has a definite period of life, and we haven't been privy to see it at this stage. There will come a time when those things will deteriorate as well.
Concrete itself has cancer and it's deteriorating.
Mm.
Yeah, you have concrete cancer all the time, don't you? Yeah. So you have, unless you are constantly looking after those buildings and repairing them and the like, they will disintegrate over time. And you know, this is what's going to happen to all uncared for cities and towns and houses and the like. If no one's there to look after them, no one there to upgrade them, to look to fix them up, what happens? It all ends up as dust. And perhaps if you're lucky, there might be a few things or a few remnants found, like some of the items there, or like that cartoon way back at the beginning where they found the cubicles of computers and said that they thought it might have been some kind of prison cell.
I remember seeing a cartoon once of archaeologists digging up, it was a McDonald's M, and they were sort of postulating whether it was some sort of goddess symbol.
and it could have been too, lying down.
No.
What a legacy.
Okay, so as I began this talk tonight, I leave you with the thought that there really is no answer or quick fix to the question I posed. Did humans live as we do now with similar or better levels of technology, thousands if not millions of years before us, or more precisely, before our recorded history? I leave this for you to decide for yourself. Very good.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. That's certainly given us a lot to think about, hasn't it?
There's nothing we can prove, nothing we can disprove. It's one of those subjects that, like all my subjects, I think have always been that way, like Atlantis and psychic realms and cloning and what are the odds? Ufology and the like. Always difficult to prove. All of them seem to have had something to do with this subject.
Yes. And what is proof? No, not, even the best scientists are still using intuition and interpretation of facts. One of the things that has always been used me for quite some time is that we think about atoms with that little nucleus and all the electrons going around it, which is a wonderful concept, but no one's actually physically seen it because it's so small it cannot be seen. So where the hell did they come up with that idea? I mean, it may be true. It may be one of the basic principal building blocks because our sun and stars and that work that way. But it just always bemuses me that scientists talk about it like it's a reality beyond questioning. And I think that applies to all these sciences. And not just the sciences, the religions too. They're all about interpretation by people at specific times. And within the scientific community, there's more debate about interpretation than we realise. They just give us particularly information at the educational level, but behind the scenes, they are constantly bickering with one another over whether something's real or not.
And I guess the question is, they're all theories.
They're all theories, yes.
They only become fact when most of the scientists agree that they're fact.
Fact, yes.
It's like Pluto, poor old Pluto. You know, since it was discovered, it was a planet. And it was only just, I think, last year that they decided it was no longer a planet, it's a planetoid. So it's lost its place. We've now only got 8 planets in the solar system, not 9. But then again, some of the moons of Jupiter are bigger than Pluto, so maybe they could have been classified as planets. So maybe we've got about 20 or 30 planets in our solar system, not merely the 9 that we used to have.
Yes.
So, and this is all because scientists got together and said, we're kicking Pluto out.
It's a bit like the debate in the Middle Ages about whether Jesus owned his own clothes, which happened in the church. You know, people of a particular kind get together and make this debate about whether something's a fact or not, and that changes the whole concept of how they view Jesus as a result. So what it all means is that we've got to keep an open mind. when we look at all these things. There are concepts in the Theosophical writings that people go, that sounds a bit ridiculous. And maybe they are. Maybe there's some things that they are interpretations of these concepts of the 19th century Blavatsky's writings. But on the other hand, she may be touching on things that are sacred teachings that we just don't comprehend. And we've got to expand our minds and see if we can picture it all. So I think that was a wonderful talk to give us some other information. Actually, I would add, I saw a program a while back on scientists, and this was two French archaeologists who were working somewhere like Turkestan, Central Asia, around it was a desert, but it had been once an oasis, and they were chasing up the remnants of something like an early form of the rhinoceros, and all they had was shards and bones, etc. But in the process of trying to find the bones, they found bones of other creatures, and when they started putting them all together, they could then build up a picture of the oasis. And what did they discover? There was ape-like creatures around this area, and this was pre-ape times in Africa. Right? So they were saying they're saying that two scientists were saying it isn't out of Africa, it's out of Central Asia. But they were having an awful time trying to debate this with the mainstream archaeological because they just are so stuck on out of Africa. And I thought at the time, this just shows you there are differences of opinions. And no one's right or wrong, they're just different ways of looking at it. So I think that was wonderful talk. It was what I was expecting. Has anyone got any more questions or ideas they want to throw in?
It's like a Big Bang Theory, you know, science is so locked into this Big Bang Theory that last year there was a letter in New Scientist and it was strongly questioning this whole concept of Big Bang, and the only reason New Scientist published a letter is it was signed by about 30 or 40 scientists, because if it hadn't have been that, the prevailing antagonism to anything that's not Big Bang, the magazine would not have published it. It needed that many scientists to confront the status quo kind of Big Bang Theory that everyone...
So I understand there's more theories out there contrary to the Big Bang, but getting credibility.
Starting to now,
Yeah,
It's a strange one.
No, I just want to repeat what I said. What we don't know as ancient history, and what people learn as ancient history, isn't really that ancient at all.
No.
Yeah.
But like I said, for some reason the creationists are quite believing that their argument is won by accepting by accepting this that Darwin was wrong, and that's the proof they needed, and for some strange reason that still fits into their 5,000 year scenario, which I would understand if they were willing to say, well, you know, it was just God's interpretation, you know, it wasn't really 1 week to create the earth, 1 week it was equal to, you know, billions of human years, but it was 1 week to God type of thing, and 5,000 years wasn't really 5,000 years, it was, you know, 500 billion years or something, but it was what?
The next day.
It was, for God it was just the next day or something, or it was the next week or something like that. So yeah, if they were willing to accept that kind of concept, you could say, well, yeah, that's more in tune with what they're saying, but it's not. They still stick by that 5,000 year thing, which is bizarre.
I remember having an argument one time with somebody over from the creationist side, and they were teaching in school that the dinosaurs were created in one day, in one of those days, but they died in that day. And yet you have these creatures that have eggs and have small sizes and bigger sizes and bigger sizes. They could not grow to that sort of concept in one day. And I don't think God's about making all these half creatures, etc.
But see, their concept is that God can do anything. If God wants to do all that in one day, God can.
Yes.
But that's where I think it comes to their concept of 1 day. That it's a concept of God's 1 day, which may be that, you know, thousands and thousands or millions of years or whatever. And it's just their concept. They can't grasp that concept that it's not really one.
It's not a human day, it's a God's day.
Yeah, it's a God's day, not a human day. Yeah. But that's just a theory.
Yes.
You're free to accept or reject.
Actually, I've always thought that a lot of the theosophical concepts of evolution bridge between the two of Darwin and the biblical line by saying, yes, there is a sort of a linear evolution physically where you can see that things develop from one to the other, and there's a continuing sort of development of structures, they're becoming more and more complex, but the impetus behind that process is a spiritual that comes from an inner, I don't even like to use the word God in this sense, but from something divine or some higher concept. And I remember what time it was on David Attenborough, one of his shows, he was talking about how supposedly the apes came out of the trees onto land, but no one understood why they suddenly did it. Now, to me, the way he discussed it, to me it was like, yes, something above suddenly said, right, next impetus, the next leap, because it goes in leaps. Darwin's theory has, not flaws, but that scientists have had to rework it because Darwin just thought it would be a gradual thing, but everything goes in a quantum leap. It moves and jumps to the next stage.
Yeah, I think the one that gets me is the one about Neanderthals and how, for some reason, they're not even considered to be humans by many scientists. And when you look at the skull structures of whatever, and you think,
Thank you. Good evening. See you
Okay.
all. I've got to work early in the morning.
Okay.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
who's locking up?
I'll lock up and
we'll
I'll
do
take the
it.
key back to
Thanks, the key.
Melanie tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
I'm interested in what you were saying about the theosophical evolution. It goes up from plants to planets, then to something, then to universes, something we can't even comprehend, the whole universe. So this is in Secret Doctrine. This is the Theosophical side of things.
Well, I think some of that's my interpretation of the Secret Doctrine.
Right.
I discussed this with Celia one time, and she said, "No, I can't go any further than that." I said, "But you're saying that it just ends at universe. I think there's universes, and being universes, you can have like the concept that all through our lives we go through a schooling system, for example, where you start off as a small fish in this big pond, and then you become the big fish in the little pond, and then you find out that you've got to go back, you're going to the big school next time, and you end up being a little fish again, and then you get through and you get to be the big fish again, and the whole thing just keeps on going round and round and round. Well, it's the same concept of going through those different pools into different gradings of your existence, from that little fish to the big fish, the little fish, big fish, all the way up through your existence, where however far that goes, and suggesting that you go from little me to a godlike.
Is this all through separate lives, reincarnation? Is this what you're suggesting? Is that that's the only way you can?
Well, it's an evolutionary process. Now, it's not saying, this is my interpretation of it, and that you continue to go through these different processes where you become like the god of this little system, which might be Earth and the Moon, and then you become the god of the solar system, and then the god of the galaxy, and the god of...
Gee, that's a career path.
It is. As long as you're good.
It's really not a matter of I, it's the spiritual aspect that's behind the I.
Yeah.
I die, I dissipate,
Yes.
but that spiritual entity, and this is one of the hard parts to grasp, because on one hand, even in Theosophic we talk about the monads, there's so many monads, and we've each got a monad behind us, but the word monad means one. So there's only one spiritual consciousness, but somehow or other it filters through into many. And even in Buddhism, they talk about not just Buddhas of earth, they talk about solar Buddhas. They talk about Buddhas of higher states of consciousness. So it's not just a matter of being focused in this one little body. At that point, consciousness is spread out. Its awareness is far greater. But we can't comprehend from where we are because we're focused here, aren't we?
We're right here.
There's a wonderful poem of Rumi, the Sufi poet, who says, I died as a mineral became plant. I died as a plant became animal. I died as an animal and became man. Therefore, why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Once more I shall die to soar with angels blessed, but even from angelhood I must move on. All but God doth perish. Oh, let me not exist, so that in organ tones to him we shall return. So the concept there that there's something that's moving through all these things, and there's no fear, because wherever we leave one thing, we go to something even, not necessarily greater, they're all equal, but we go to different states all the time. There's nothing to worry about. I'm giving a lecture there. Okay, now next meeting will be, we don't have a study group because it's Anzac Day, but our next meeting will be in the second Friday in May, and we're having Pedro Oliveira come up, who's our education coordinator from Sydney. And of course, we've had Pedro here before. He's very colourful Brazilian, and an international lecturer. He's lectured all around the Pacific, Indo-Pacific area, and the Americas, and even in Europe. So he's someone to look forward to. And he's talking about conversations with Buddhist monks. And I'm quite intrigued by that title, because I know he spent some time in Sri Lanka talking to some Buddhist monks there. So I don't know what's about that experience or not, but it's something to look forward to. Okay, well, thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for my cameraman.
I haven't turned it off yet. I haven't pressed the button.
Huh?
I've left you to press the button.
Oh, okay. Oh, you can press the button if you like.
Oh, okay.
Oh,